is the Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callum Halbman, and joining us today is Nemteanu. Welcome to our podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing fantastic.
We are so excited to have you join us today on the Data Slice. Lots to talk about. You have a really interesting background. I know your career has spanned across all sorts of industries. You've done AI initiatives in healthcare, life sciences, cyber, telecom. You have also been in the education world. You were previously the executive director for the business analytics programs at the Rady School of Management at UCSD. You've also done lectures at USD. A very busy guy over here. So lots of background that I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about, because today's overall theme is teaching the next generation, younger students or young working professionals about responsible data science, responsible AI. So knowing your background, I know you have a lot of experience with that. So maybe first off, could you just tell us a little bit more? I know I just did a big overall summary, but lots to talk about with your background. So how did it kind of all start for you?
I mean, that's such a great question. And it's always fun to do a retrospective, right? And I think my theme today is it doesn't always go as planned, because I still feel like I'm that student who still needs that direction, and you just kind of evolve over time. But, you know, as far back as I could remember, I think I've always been into computers. And, you know, when you think about your high school guidance counselor, you flip through back in the day, there were the catalogs, the big thick books. I said, oh, here's something with the word computers in it. It was called computer science. And I decided, you know, let's start there and see what happens. And as I started there and started coding, I realized I wanted to change. That's when I started getting into business. And, you know, just kind of towards the end of my undergraduate life, I found an internship. And hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more. But it just kind of kicked off the tech world. I was in the IT. I started as a help desk technician. But there were the little jobs on the side. There's, helping your end users, fixing computers, setting up, getting to know people. That was great. But it was these little areas where, you know, I first started working on their telecom bills and analyzing invoices, and it kind of struck a chord with me. And then my next job after that, which was still entry level, was analytics. And quickly from there, promoted into my first management job. And none of this was according to plan. I would call it, there's a vision, you know, there's an ambition. You want to go out there, you kind of know what you want, but, you know, it wasn't such a rigorous goal. I didn't want to, you know, put anything like, I have to work for the Facebooks of the world. That was something that would be nice, but I kept my options somewhat open, and a little bit of serendipity, a little bit of hard work, and it kind of just comes together. And I love it. I mean, I think that I've just followed my passion, but it always was kind of guiding me at the same time. You know, you got to know yourself and know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and double down.
I know you've done lectures for schools. You have been an executive director, like we said. You are also now an AI consultant. So back then, like you said, it sounds like you didn't necessarily have this super specific plan. When you kind of look at the career that you've had, especially where you're at now, back then, do you think if you told your old self what you turned out doing, would you even believe it?
No, not at all. I mean, I have these little life-defining moments, career-defining moments that I look back on and think about, what was I thinking back then, you know? And one of them was, you know, I would go to events all the time, because being one of the early data scientists, there wasn't a lot of people I could talk to and learn from. So I went to a lot of events. I met a ton of great people there, and I would ask them, oh, you know, how would you test this? How would you experiment on this? And what I kind of found out as I was doing that is people started asking me those questions. And all of a sudden, you know, you elevate each other, right? And the mentor becomes the mentee. And a lot of it is, I don't want to say don't have a plan, but I don't want to use the word plan, because sometimes, you know, if it doesn't go perfectly, but you know, I always knew. So with the teaching thing, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do in retirement? I still so far from retirement. And I thought, okay, you know what I need to do? I think I want to teach in retirement. And I put myself out there, and I just had a conversation with somebody, and one presentation led to one connection, which led to another. And all of a sudden they say, hey, we have a class we want to teach. Are you interested? And no idea what I was doing. Sure, I'll do it. Okay, we'll build the class. And it just, you know, sometimes you get caught up in your own wake, but it ends up being such a blessing that you just kind of go with it, you know?
Totally.
Like, yeah.
I know you said kind of back earlier in your career, in terms of data science, it wasn't as big of a thing. There weren't as many people to talk to. You mentioned now it is definitely a much bigger program in colleges. It's a bigger, more popular career. What is it like for you to kind of see the industry grow and change like that?
It's amazing. I mean, I can't think of any other field that is going through the similar type of evolution where it's connected to human evolution, it's connected to convenience and healthcare and everything, and data has a lot of bad actors, it has a lot of good things. And so I'm glad people are now starting to see it. I think they've always seen the value of it, but it was kind of at a distance. We know it's this thing, this nebulous thing we don't quite understand, but now they're seeing what it can do, and you get a little bit of the excitement and a little bit of the fear that goes along with it. But having those discussions, starting those discussions, and seeing a lot of people, I mean, even all the way up to the federal level, the world level, it's nice. It's nice to see that. I think that we're still at the very beginning, and I've been saying that for decades. So I don't know if we'll ever grow out of the startup phase, but it's nice, right? Because this is going to be 20 years from now. It's not going to look like what it is today. It's such a fast ramp up curve that we don't know where we are in that kind of Moore's law idea.
Totally. Could you talk a little more about your current work as an AI consultant? Because,
Sure.
Talk about a role that didn't even necessarily exist at one point in time.
I mean, I loved being part of industry. I loved being part of academia. And I think it was just time to make a change, and working through, at UCSD, there's a lot of capstone projects, which are these experiential projects, and you just kind of see the capabilities. You see now with, the different AI tools that are out there, it's helping people with all different levels of talent really pick up on it and go forward. So with that talent, I just saw that, maybe it could accelerate. Maybe I could use my background and work with a couple of, more of the smaller companies that maybe can't afford the bigger consultants, and just give some advice to some folks and work at a different pace for a little while.
In that role, have you seen a big push for talks about the ethics of AI and data science?
Yes. To answer your question, everyone's talking about it, but nobody really has the answer. I think that's ethics in a nutshell,
Yeah.
And what it really boils down to is there's a lot of ideas out there on how you could minimize, ethical disruption. The problem is it costs time and money. And there's a lot of different types of data scientists that are out there. There's the entrepreneurs, they're building products. There's the, finance, accounting, all the different roles. And proposing this to either as the data scientist communicating to different business leaders, or even business leaders thinking, oh, we have to do something because we want to do the right thing, but I don't know how to integrate this into our processes. It just seems like it slows things down. And what we don't have is the kind of measurable result we would get by putting something like this in place. And I've read through just, in terms of doing research for the consulting that I do, or even podcasts, it's still at that phase is why. Why do we need to change the way we do AI development when we don't really see what the value is? And every now and then there's, some story that comes out and everybody will talk about it for a couple of weeks, and somebody gets hacked and data privacy will be an issue. And these are all serious things, which are day in the life of a data scientist, but it's a marginal risk to the rest of the leadership of the business.
There's been lots of talks and steps taken when it comes to policies and regulations and standards when it comes to AI and data science. What is that like, as someone in the industry and so involved in the industry? What is it like to see those types of things kind of change and grow as well?
I think it's good, and it's kind of risky at the same time. So, as a leader in the field, what you see is, first of all, these types of folks, they're out of reach for a lot of companies. They're not, typically they're not free, and they bring a lot of expectation with them. Well, if we're going to be getting this, then the return on these types of roles needs to be 10x or more, and that's obviously just a figure. That's kind of thinking about the expectation between somebody in marketing or a data scientist. It's a very high return by comparison. And what that says is, okay, now if regulation comes in, we have to invest more into those areas. We now have to have, legal is going to be reviewing these cases. We have to set up committees to say, should we, can we and should we? Which from my perspective, I think it's wonderful, because I think that you can do a lot of things to cause harm, even if you're not, this is not, we'll put the bad actors aside for now. That's a whole conversation. But there's these unintentional, sometimes, consequences that don't show up until, after you've delivered it. And even if you sat and thought about it, you may not have seen that potential outcome. So what these discussions end up doing is, well, let's think about every possible situation that could come up with. And there's no really way to measure whether or not those risks will be materialized. So it just becomes dialogue. People talk about it, but again, they don't quite know how to action it.
Yeah. In a white paper that DSA published that we actually talked about on the last Data Slice episode, part of that white paper talks about the phrase AI arms race, kind of the pressure to integrate AI. If you're a business, a company, do you think it kind of relates to what you're talking about of the cost and everything? Do you think the pressure to keep up with the technology and innovations kind of becomes a barrier to, thinking about the ethics, when there might just be a focus on just using it and keeping up versus thinking about how we're using it and whether or not it's being used responsibly?
I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? You have competitive forces. And I always used to call it FOMO. I don't know if that term is still popular or not, but it's kind of the same lines as there's definite a fear of missing out. And in the business side of things, missing out means you had a customer that was on the fence and your competition got to them quicker because they use these tools, and these tools are very robust. There's a phrase, meet your customer where they are, personalization. So the better you are at doing that, and AI is getting better and better. It's already pretty good at it. Means, well, if they're doing it, then we're going to be an afterthought. And, instead of thinking years, it's now months. So you put this speed on the development process, and that process is, well, anytime you do anything quickly, you run the risk of maybe, it's kind of like, quality in terms of manufacturing. Well, you're manufacturing these massive amounts of mathematical code. There's also quality issues that can happen. And the question is, how much time and money do you spend to possibly find out that it wasn't there, right? Not that it was, because if you find it, you've got your metric. Obviously, we find these issues all the time. But most of the time, you're just going to be spinning your wheels. And so where's that happy medium? So this isn't, in my opinion, it's not a should we or shouldn't we? It's, well, we need to find that balance of speed. You'll never catch me saying we need to do everything, because obviously the business side of things is like, we do have to be competitive and we don't want to miss out. We do want to grow, and, we want our people to stay employed, but how do we balance both sides? Because right now it is mainly on that, develop and ask for forgiveness later, right? Like do it and see what breaks, and, test and learn, fail fast.
Totally. It's a tricky, like you said, there's that balance. There's that fine line that sounds like it can be very tricky to find.
Yeah, I've taught this in some of my classes, a picture of a scale and balancing business needs versus, the analytical rigor. And I'm great at educating what the balance is, and not so great at actually finding it, and maybe that's where we go from here, is how do we have a dialogue that says, here's what you need to do and why, because of how it fits your particular business. Like, what is your particular risk profile? And then from there, how much do you need to invest into making sure you have an AI policy and, you're ethically sound? And the thing about ethics is, it's gray, right? So you'll never be perfect. There'll always be some level of controversy. And I think the transparency that comes along with it, that we have thought about that and we still made a mistake, the fact that you did goes a long way, right? And, people will probably be a little bit more forgiving with that.
Circling back to, you said you teach about that scale and this fine line that we just mentioned. in classes. So as someone who has worked with and taught kind of the next generation of tech leaders, tech experts with data science and AI, what do you think students should really know about or be considering when it comes to entering such a quickly evolving industry? Is there any certain mindset you think they need to have, just considering how tricky, like we said, it can be?
Yeah, I think mindset is the right word because you're going to come out of whichever program you're in. There's a lot of programs that now teach this, right? There's business analytics, there's computer science, there's data science, now AI. They all teach a foundation of it, and I think the best data scientists are the ones that approach them as problem solvers, not engineers, right? They think about, well, I know how to build AI models. I know how to put them together. I know how to test them. That's not what I'm showcasing. I'm showcasing that I'm listening to what people are asking for. It could be customers if you're building a product. It could be your stakeholders if you're trying to solve an internal business problem. Go, what really is the problem here? Call it rapid prototyping. And there's two reasons this is important. Is if you listen to what the problem is and you think this could be solved by something simple, then you almost need something simple anyways to jump off of to find out how much better AI will be in the entire solution. And if it doesn't need to be there, then you move on to the next one, and you'll get runway to build something very complicated, but it helps you tell your story, which goes on to my second point is communication. So I've heard this a lot from our stakeholders and university engagement and just people coming say, what is the number one missing thing that students have coming out of the program? And it's interesting, for a very technical field, the number one thing that we hear the most is communication. And that's, I think, just now tying into what I've seen in industry, there's groups of software teams everywhere. But as far as who presents the most, the data scientists are in meetings talking about things that they've seen, what they can build. It's almost like they have to be the communication, on stage presence rather than the behind the curtain type of personality. And it's not they're not predisposed. They didn't choose this field because they wanted the attention. They liked working with math. And so I think that practicing that and working on some of the fear that comes along with that is great. That's kind of why I would go and do presentations also, is just to exercise that skill. That's going to take you a long way, I think, anyways.
Are there any specific concepts or anything that you think they should really hold on to? Or maybe, again, we use the word mindset when it comes to kind of specifically the ethics, like we talked about. Maybe they are coming out of college and have this awesome data science role that they really wanted, but now they are working with data in the real world. Are there things you want them to remember that maybe they learned in a classroom about not just how to be a good data scientist, but also a responsible one?
Don't think you know the answer to every problem. You got to have this discipline. And part of that discipline is, how should I approach this problem? So, for example, thinking about what we do here with the Data Science Alliance as part of the working group, working on a framework to say, here's some guidelines for what you should think about. Every single person, I like to think of it as, it's not step-by-step instructions. It's kind of having somebody with you, guiding you along the way, that are like having these other experts guide you. The other thing is, don't try to do it all yourself. I mentioned communication and I think networking is a big piece of that. You want to build trust. You either want to build trust with your community, with your products, or with your stakeholders. And I think that's kind of the main goal, right? Is, do people trust me enough that I'm not out there to cause any harm? And so in order to do that, you have to bring in other people. And there's a lot of theories on this. Well, a data science team should be made up of more than data scientists, right? You should have product people there, you should have legal people there, et cetera. So you need to find people you can talk to and say, I thought about this risk, and I don't really know if this is a showstopper. Like, I say trusted people, right? So you want to think about who you discuss this with, and bounce ideas off of it. 9 times out of 10, it might just be something that you needed to talk through with somebody and be like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of overthinking about it. But every now and then, you're just going to say, I still don't feel right about what I'm doing. where do I go next? And so have that mapped out. It's almost kind of like mapping out your escalation, right? Where do I go to? I think it's very few and far between that you're in an area where you might be bullied into doing something you don't want to do, and therefore you have to call an ethics hotline or whatever it is. I don't think that's necessary. That's like a last case resort. But most of the time, people are very willing to help you through it. And so have a following, have a network, talk to people. You'll hear me say this a lot. People are kind of your best resource, right? Other data scientists, other people in your business, other experts, and surround yourself with people that are like-minded. What's the problem that we're really trying to solve? And is this really an issue that we need to discuss?
You mentioned earlier the framework and the working group that we have here at Data Science Alliance, which is something you're very involved with. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work and the framework and kind of what you've done with it?
Sure. Let me start with a little history. So I joined DSA as a working group member, even member. I don't even remember. It was the early days, and the reason that happened is I was kind of looking for something in this space. Meaning, I've done a lot of work now. I've worked with healthcare data and patient information, and all for really great reasons. And we had processes that we had to go through to keep it safe. And I kind of sensed that, well, this field is going to evolve. And I just felt a lot of pressure on myself to be the spokesperson for how we should handle it. Whereas I also kind of felt like my job should be to build. And you get this dichotomy of, well, I have to be a leader, but I also have to engineer. And I've always clashed with the business side of what I want to do and how we should push forward and do what's right by the business versus, well, we're in an area where we can now do things and potentially, it's information that would go out that could potentially be wrong. This whole game is about generalization and inference, trying to prove whether or not what you're doing works. And statistics has always been about, making these generalized assumptions. And if you don't test it, you could be way off and say, oh, oops, well, that's just how statistics goes, right? But you can do experiments. That's why I really love that it's called data science, because I always say we got to put the science back in data science, right? You have a hypothesis, you go in and you test it, but it's not about AUC or any of the stuff you hear from most data scientists in these meetings, these very technical terms. It's about how well that stuff led to what it is you were trying to accomplish, And so coming back, I try to find like-minded folks, just like I was talking about, is where can I go to meet with people to find out how to solve this next challenge and what I think in my career will be, which is how do you handle these gray areas, And so I found DSA and we started talking about the working group and really the framework and said, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to be around all the same people, all looking for all the same stuff. And so thought leaders, academics, influencers, industry experts. I mean, the people that sat in that room to kind of work through this are phenomenal. And they're, extremely qualified, extremely educated. And it was just great to work in them. And as we're starting to, you've seen the versions, they're obviously public, and we're trying to get feedback on it. The challenge is still there is why? Right? The framework, I think, is great, and it'll continue to evolve. It's a living, breathing document. But how can you get somebody to say, I have to use this? And I haven't found that answer yet. And that's the question I always bring up is, going through all of this, it's going to take extra time. And, I put my leadership hat on. Well, do we want to do this, or would we rather spend that time doing development or other activities? And I'm looking for that kind of secret sauce in the middle. So the framework itself is wonderful, and I've used lots and lots of guides throughout my career to say, here's how you should do things. But none of them are perfectly clear. There's a lot of, other personality traits you have to have. You have to be ambitious and think about the problem, blah, blah, blah. And I think the framework helps clarify some of those things and also gives some good case studies and talks about, situations that can get into, but not every situation is the same. So you have to use it in your bag of tricks, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to read through the framework and what I think the best way to look at it is not so much what's written, but what were they trying to tell you in such a confined amount of space? Oh, you got all of these experts coming together, and we have these lengthy dialogues about what should be written into here. And then you end up getting a couple of sentences boiled down to be succinct. And it's like, okay, you have to understand that people are trying to convey a message to you as a younger data scientist or earlier career, or how, just somebody getting started, to say, I think that one, maybe they should read it and reach out to you guys and say, hey, what did you mean by this? Because I think I need some advice in this spot. Or, it just helps clarify that, one, you're not alone in a lot of these problems. And two, here's some of the ways that we've tried to manage it, so.
DSA is very about promoting responsible data science and AI practices, kind of creating a community, like you said, of people that believe in that, want to promote it, want to learn it. We are based in San Diego, so for students who are in San Diego, a really great community. But for students who maybe aren't in San Diego, do you have advice for ways that they can find like-minded people? If they maybe are looking for something like this, of course, always come to DSA. But on a more general sense, what are some things people, especially younger people, can do to be sure they're learning about the ethics and at least trying to be responsible with data?
I think that if you're close to a university, plug in to them. Doesn't matter which one. They're analytics, data science area. There's always events that are open to the public that you can go in and meet people. That's one of the first ways I met folks at UCSD that is still paying dividends. And this was when I was much, much, much younger. Meetup groups was another thing. And it turned out somebody I met at one of the universities was hosting a meetup group. And you just find out it's a really small, tight-knit community. LinkedIn groups, your tie in, subscribe to your alma maters, and just check in on it. When I mentioned discipline earlier, that's kind of what I'm talking about. If you don't know, if you know that you don't know the answers, then you're going to seek advice. And you could do, let me go see if anyone's talking about this on the forum. Let's go see what other publications have written about it. And you educate yourself, like a literature review with every project, and these groups are fantastic.
Staying on the topic of advice, I know we said it's a fine line, kind of gray area when it comes to the ethics and everything of data science and AI, and so much is changing all the time. Do you have advice for students and early in their career professionals who are maybe feeling overwhelmed? They might feel like it's hard to keep up with all the changes and trends and innovations.
Yeah. They ask that question in interviews too. How do you stay up on everything? And you really, it's an impossible task. Every week, 5 new things come out, and you can act like a jack of all trades, but what is it? Jack of all trades, master of none. I use the phrase discipline a lot, and reason being is because you can't know it all. So when I was earlier on, whenever I would start a project, I always made sure I did a review first, and that way, part of your process has these little, spots along the way to do what new technology has come out, what have I missed, what new codes, what new packages, is something deprecated. So you go in and you fit it in as part of your process along the way. And the more you do that, the more discipline you have, the better you get at it, right? So you start having trusted areas and channels and places that you could go to where it starts getting faster and faster. And I think that kind of standard is, it's not something you'll find in a playbook. It's just something that this field needs is, hey, it's part of the science. What else is out there, and what tools are available, and et cetera. So just build it in as part of your process, label it as a non-negotiable item, figure out how long it takes, communicate that to your stakeholders. This is probably more of a, just a experience, but telling your project manager that, I need to do a literature review, or I need to go do XYZ, those conversations are always going to end up in, well, but if you didn't do that, how much faster can we get it, right? Or some kind of thing along those lines. And so you have to figure out how to communicate. This is part of what goes into building things, right? And that's what I've always tried to do is we're not negotiating that I need to see what else is out there, that what other packages are out there, and software packages, things like that, because that is part of the data science day to day of what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be testing and experimenting. The word experiment, even that, everyone uses that word in academia and high school, whatever, throughout education. But for some reason, it's labeled with, like, it comes with extra baggage and extra time when you're working in industry. And so it's like, well, you have to do experiments. Why are you asking for time to do that, right? And your challenge is to not just waste their time and people are asking for updates and, again, communication. You just say, I'm gonna do this. I'll have a product by this point, and it kind of boils back down to that. So, I'll kind of just leave it at that. Is you just build it into your process. Make sure you do your reviews and just focus on your fundamentals, so that each time you do something, you get a little bit better at it each time you do it.
I know we've talked a lot about advice for students, kind of reversing it in a way. Do you have advice for maybe seasoned working professionals who maybe find themselves working with a younger person and hopefully, responsible data science and AI that is being taught more in schools, but maybe someone in their field is suddenly dealing with a new team member who's young and hasn't necessarily thought about the ethics of the work that they're doing? Do you have advice for that, more experienced older person, how they can approach teaching younger generations about it?
Yes. So I'll start with the technical leader, the person that maybe hired a data scientist, because I think there's a lot to be said also about non-data science leadership. But these folks that are coming out, it's the technology is not just evolving, it's their intelligence is evolving also. These are folks that every generation that goes through, and I think there's a whole new generation coming through now, Gen Alpha. They know things we knew at a much younger age. So by the time they come out, the amount of technical knowledge they have is well beyond what we had in school, right? And so you could stay abreast of things, but just that hands-on learning aspect, they're fully powered. I mean, they have some really, really interesting skills. So my advice to them is you have to share those kind of more real world guidelines of what it means to be in industry. In some cases we joke about it, but it's like even how to set up calendar invites and to be there on time and be punctual. And some things that you seem like, it's like, well, why are we even talking about this? But in some cases it's like, look, here's why we have to position it this way, is because, this is the expectation we have. So you're sharing more about what it means to be part of a team, but you do have to open the doors and let them be creative, because the stuff that they will create are pretty amazing, and you have to be kind of more of a coach than more of like a technical, like, here's how you need to do XYZ. That's kind of losing its pace. You should be able to question your team, right, and say, well, why did you go this way and that way? So you do need to have that technical knowledge, but you can't close the door on their ideas. Now, for the non-technical leaders, there's discussions that still need to be had between the folks that are investing in these teams and the teams. There's still a little bit of a divide between technical leadership and business leadership on where does this fit into the big picture. Does it belong in an IT discussion? Does it belong in a finance discussion or a product discussion? And who are these data scientists? And why is this person saying they're one and they're... So, I think that there's a lot to be heard still. And then those leadership sharing their perspectives with the team on, well, here's why our strategy is important, right? That way they kind of get a seat at the table, which for a field that's growing like this, you think you would see more of these, but there's still those traditional type leaders are generally still making decisions. But I think the data science perspective in those discussions is going to evolve. And so, like, my takeaway for all of them is listen and don't close the door on good ideas, right? Let people test and learn and experiment, fail and try again. And each time they do that, it's just going to get a little bit better,
Having worked in education and really with that next generation, like we've talked about, do you feel optimistic? I know you said they're learning so much faster, knowing things so much earlier on in their careers. Does that leave you feeling optimistic about, where the industry is going?
I mean, yeah, we're kind of watching history unfolding, so I think it's very optimistic. I think that, we see a lot of big changes already, using just AI and coding, for example. If you're a coder, then you already know how amazing it is. A lot of people don't know that because they've never coded. You can kind of see the self-driving cars, and you're starting to see the big convenience items coming out. But what you don't see a lot about is how healthcare is using these tools, and a lot of the impact these tools will have on our lives and society. And so I'm extremely optimistic. I can't wait. I hope that we all have a very smooth and graceful retirement, and look forward to having this new level of automation following us around.
Lots to keep track of, I think, as these
Yes.
students come in,
Yeah.
as they take over. Are there any specific resources I'm curious to leave our listeners with? Because I know you mentioned the framework, whether they are that next generation or a seasoned professional like we talked about. Are there any resources or outlets, anything like that you would recommend keeping an eye on or following to stay up to date on all of this? Like we said, lots of positivity, optimistic, but lots to keep track of. So are there resources you like?
That I like? Oh man, Google is my best friend. ChatGPT is my best friend, but for certain reasons. I mean, obviously tongue in cheek, but so with Google, I'll go and I'll read papers every time something comes out to say, all right, I'm working on whatever this project is. I'm gonna try it like this because this is the way I've done it. Hey, ChatGPT, this is what my code looks like. This is what I'm trying to do. So I'm learning how to communicate with AI, which I think is really interesting. And there's ways of doing it that just make it better and better. But then also just kind of following along on the public sphere, like staying tied into what's happening in society. So there's the White House Forum on AI. So I like following what type of regulations and bills, and what are the committees that are doing, what are they talking about? And you'll notice most of the time they're talking about big tech or product, right? And once again, they're missing, I would say, the majority of data scientists are on these teams that maybe aren't developing the product directly, but they're developing everything else. And so I think that, know your strengths and your weaknesses and find out how to bolster them, So something I do is I read like different pitches on how to communicate certain ideas. And I don't think I'm an expert at all. I think I can keep getting better and better. And so I think that it's just stay active and learning and find outlets that you like, that fit you, and just realize that this is a challenging field and it'll continue to evolve, and and don't try to do it yourself. There's friends, you have friends in the field. So
a lot of those friends are here at the Data Science Alliance.
Yeah.
One last plug for DSA, especially if you're in San Diego.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, coming on the podcast. It's really fun to have people like you who have been involved in DSA for a long time come on the new podcast and kind of reflect on where we're at in the industry. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, follow the Data Science Alliance on all of your favorite social media platforms. Don't forget, DSA is a 501c3 nonprofit, and you can support us. You can do a one-time donation, a monthly or annual donation by becoming a member. You can volunteer on our projects or attend our events. We have lots going on every single month. We're located here in San Diego, California, so get involved. Go to our website, datasciencealliance.org, to learn all the ways you can do so. But otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.